Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding the Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and today we will be learning at Mirat Hashem Daf Ayin Amud Aleph. Before we begin, our learning should be a schus for Acheduk Beis Yisrael. Hanesunim Batzara Bashivya Ha'imnim Bein Bayamo Bein Bayabasha Makeh Berachah Alehem V'Yitziah Mitzar L'Ravacha Me'afelo La'Eiro Mishibir L'Geula Hashta Bagalo Zman Kariv V'Demar Amen. Our learning should also be a schus for Refuah Shalema for our real Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and Meir ben Chayesara, who are in need of Rachamei Shamayim. Now, we are holding in middle of Hilchos B'tzias HaPas. We've been discussing the proper bracha Rishayna and the proper bracha Achrona on all manner of preparations that are made out of flour and water. We pick up today on Ayin Amud Aleph, 3 lines down, Sif Yud Daled. So it's Siman Kuf Samach Ches, Sif Yud Daled, where the Mechaber begins with the word chalut. Now, before we get into chalut, and before we get into some of the other preparations that are going to be discussed in this sif, I think we need to do kind of a quick recap of some of the halachas that we have learned until now, just so that we have the proper context to understand the things that we're going to be speaking about today. So, if you remember, I hope you remember, this is all been very complicated. If you go all the way back to Samach Ches Amud Aleph, Siman Kuf Samach Ches Sif Yud, we discussed a preparation called chavitza. Now, what was chavitza? So the Mechaber told us that there are different types of chavitza. One type of chavitza is where you take pieces of bread. So we're talking about bona fide 100% bread. You take pieces of rye bread, you take pieces of challah, and you go ahead and you cook them. The Mechaber wanted to discuss what's the bracha. So you have pas, you have perfect pas, upon which the bracha certainly would be hamotzie and berachah hamazon, but now you took the pas and you cooked it. Now what happens when you cook pas? So what became obvious to us from learning the Mechaber, the Mishnah Berurah, is that when you take pas and you cook it, you lose teresa denama. When you have bread, it looks perfectly like bread. But then, when you take bread that was already baked into bread, that's very important. When you take bread that was already baked into bread, and now you subject it to cooking, you lose the teresa denama. You lose the appearance of bread. So now, when we discuss the question of cooked bread, what we're really discussing is what happens to the bracha Rishayna and the bracha Achrona when we have bread, but it no longer has teresa denama. We removed the teresa denama through cooking. What did we see in Sif Yud? We saw that the halacha is it depends on the size of the pieces. If the pieces were a kazayas and still are a kazayas after you cook them, then the halacha is that you still make hamotzie and you still make berachas hamazon, despite the fact that the cooking removed the teresa denama. And why is that? So in the words of the Mishnah Berurah back there, and Mishnah Berurah is cut nun hey, the Mishnah Berurah told us, the kevan sheyesh behem kazayas, since these pieces are kazayas, loy nispatel mehem shem lechem. They don't lose the status of bread. They don't lose the shem lechem. Apparently, since this piece of bread was a bona fide piece of bread, if you want to demote it from hamotzie and berachas hamazon to mezonot and bracha achas me'ein shalosh, we're demoting it from bread. We're taking off the status of bread, the shem lechem, and we're no longer going to consider it bread. Why? By virtue of the fact that it lost the teresa denama. Says the Mechaber, you can't do that if the piece is a kazayas. A kazayas is very choshev, so you have a choshev, a piece of bread over here. You cannot remove the status. You can't take off the shem lechem simply by removing the teresa denama through cooking. So that's if the pieces are kazayas or bigger. But if the pieces are less than a kazayas, then it gets demoted to a mezonot and a bracha achas me'ein shalosh. Why? Because it no longer has teresa denama, and it's less than a kazayas. If it's less than a kazayas, then in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, the loy have a bechlal lechem klal. It's no longer lechem. Not just that it doesn't have teresa denama. It's no longer lechem. Why? Rak kimine kedera ba'alma. Now it is a new cooked dish. As long as the pieces are bigger than a kazayas, you can't say that it's a new cooked dish. It was a piece of bread, it still is a piece of bread. But once you're talking about pieces that are less than a kazayas, and you cooked it, and it no longer has Teresa de Nama, now it's a new cooked dish. It's Mine Kedera, says the Mishnah Berurah, and it no longer has the berachah of HaMotzi and berachah HaMazon. It's Mezonos and it's berachah Achas Mein Shalish. Now, why is this important to us now when we're learning Daf Ayin Amud Aleph? So one concept you see very clear from back over there in Sif Yud, and that is that cooking, when you take bread and you subject it to cooking, you lose the Teresa de Nama. Okay, now let's move on. Then we went ahead and we spoke about in Sif Yud Gimel. We had a very complicated Sif Yud Gimel that began on Samach Tes Amud Aleph, and it carried through all the way till the beginning of Ayin Amud Aleph. In Sif Yud Gimel, we learnt the halacha of a blila ava. A blila ava is a normal bread-like dough. It's a heavy, thick dough, like the type of dough you have when you bake challah or you bake bread. That's a blila ava. We learned the halacha, what if you have a blila ava, but you don't bake it? Instead of baking the blila ava, you go ahead and you cook the blila ava. What does that mean, to cook it? It means you put it in water and you cook it in water or some other mashke, but you actually put it in a pot and you cook it. Or you fry it. What does frying mean? Frying means you put it into a pan with a copious amount of oil, so that it's really frying in the oil and it's getting the flavor of the oil and everything else, as opposed to just spraying a little film of Spam or canola oil on the bottom of the pan so that the dough shouldn't catch. That's not called frying. That's called baking. But if you cook a blila ava, or you really fry a blila ava, what's the bracha on that preparation? So on that, we saw two opinions. We had a Deir Rishona and a Yesh Chokim. The Deir Rishona said that bread is baked. That's what bread is. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah, Deloi mikri lechem ela ofoy. You cannot call something bread unless it's baked. That's the Deir Rishona. The Deir Rishona says, HaMotzi, you make HaMotzi on bread. You don't make HaMotzi on anything else. You didn't bake it, it ain't bread. Bread is baked. Bread equals baked. If it's not baked, it's not bread. That's the Deir Rishona. So even though you had a blila ava, and even if the final product that you're going to have, after the cooking and after the frying, it might even have Teresa de Nama. Says the Deir Rishona, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If it's not baked, if it ain't baked, it ain't bread. And therefore, it's not HaMotzi, it's not berachah HaMazon, it's Mezonos, and berachah Achas Mein Shalish. But then we had a Yesh Chokim. The Yesh Chokim says, if you start off with a blila ava, so that means that the dough was 100% legitimately a bread dough. So you started off lechem. So far, we've got lechem. Somebody walks into the kitchen and sees what you just took out of the bash or out of the KitchenAid or out of your kneading bowl, and as far as they can tell, this is a bread preparation. It's a bona fide blila ava, a bona fide bread dough. Now you take it and you cook it or you fry it, but the end product has Teresa de Nama. The end product looks like a bread. The Yesh Chokim says, I'm sorry, that's HaMotzi. I don't care that you didn't bake it. I don't care how you exactly prepared it, what method you used to apply heat to it. I don't care. The bottom line is it started out as lechem. It ended as lechem. It's HaMotzi and berachah HaMazon. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah, the kaven de meikara haya blila ava, since at the outset it was blila ava, which is essentially lechem, va'ata isbei Torah lechem, and now the final product still has a Torah lechem, so mavarach HaMotzi. You got to make HaMotzi. So that's the halacha that we saw. If you take a blila ava and you cook it. Now, what's very interesting, when you take the first halacha that we spoke about today, which is where you took pieces of bread and you cooked them, and now you compare that to the second halacha that we're talking about, where you take a blila ava and you cook it, you see something very interesting. In the first halacha, it became very clear that when you take bread that was already baked and you cook it or you fry it, halachically, we look at it and we say that the cooking and the frying took off the Tayar Lechem. And therefore, back in Sif Yud, the determining factor of whether the bracha is hamotzi or mezainos was the size of the pieces. What was beyond dispute was, since you cooked it, you lost the Tayar Lechem. But we said, if the pieces are still kizayis or bigger, so we can't say that it's no longer lechem. It's a hush of a piece, it's a kizayis, and it definitely was lechem, even though it doesn't have Tayar Lechem, we're still going to consider it lechem, and it's hamotzi berachas hamazon. If the pieces are less than a kizayis, it's minei kedeira, now it's a new cooked dish, it's not lechem anymore. But definitely the cooking procedure took off the Taras Lechem. In the second halacha that we're discussing today, the halacha of dough that you baked, not bread. It was never baked into bread. Now you took a dough, a raw dough, and you cooked it or you fried it. So the first opinion says that it's a mezainos because this is not called bread. Not baked, not bread. But the Yesh Chokim says, if it has Tayar Lechem, if the final product has Tayar Lechem, it's hamotzi. Why? Because it started out as a blila avo, which is a lechem preparation, and it has Tayar Lechem at the end. Now, how does it have Tayar Lechem at the end? Didn't you cook it? I thought in the first halacha that we learned, we said that cooking takes off the Tayar Lechem. How are we saying now that in the second halacha, the Yesh Chokim holds that if you take dough and you cook it or fry it, if it has Tayar Lechem, it's hamotzi. How can it have Tayar Lechem? I thought you cooked it, you fried it. Doesn't that take off the Tayar Lechem? The answer is, if you have bread that was already baked into bread, if you have slices of rye bread, slices of challah, and you go ahead and you cook them, the cooking takes off the Tayar Lechem. Because this was bread, it was baked bread. When you go ahead and you cook it, it downgrades the appearance. It definitely makes the appearance less bread-like. So the cooking costs you the Tayar Lechem. But if you take dough that was never baked into bread, and you cook it and fry it, you may get Tayar Lechem in the final product. And since you might get Tayar Lechem in the final product, the Yesh Chokim holds, if you have Tayar Lechem, it's hamotzi, and berachas hamazon, it's not mezainos. Okay. Now, against the backdrop of these two halachas, let's move on to Sif Yud Daled, and let's tackle the next case. Says the Machaber Sif Yud Daled, 3 lines down near the end of the line, Ayin Amud Aleph. Cholot, a dough preparation, a bread-like preparation that was called cholot. Now, the word cholot means scalded. What's scalded? Scalded is when you take a product and you scald it in boiling water. So the word cholot means scalded. So this is a scalded preparation. But we don't know exactly what that means. What did you scald? So right away jumps in the Ramah. And the Ramah says, Pirish, this means, kimin pas, this is something that is akin to bread, shecholten oisai beroischen, that you scalded in boiling water. Okay. The easy way to understand this, and the way most people seem to understand it, is this is a bagel. What's a bagel? A bagel is a blila ava. It's mamish a bread dough, and you take your dough and you form it into a circle. You form it into a ring. Interesting, Aruch HaShulchan says very clearly, he says, agulin shalanu, our round rolls. So I don't know if his bagels had holes in them, but these are round rolls, says Aruch HaShulchan. You take the dough, the raw dough, and you scald it in boiling water. But that's only the first step in the preparation. The second step in the preparation is that you bake them. Now, this is the way most people understand this cholot, but soon I'm going to point out that there is another way of understanding this, and the second way of understanding it answers a shver kasha. But let's first go with the simple way. Says the Mechaber Cholot, Pirish Kimin Pasha Cholton Aisai Beroischen. You have a dough, and you took the dough, it's a blila ava dough, it's a bona fide bread dough, and you scalded it in boiling water, but you didn't stop there. Sha'achar kach afo'oi betanor, and now you baked it in an oven. Okay, so let's stop here for a second before we see what the Mechaber says the halach is. So, we already learned the second halacha that we discussed at the outset of this year was what's the halacha if you take a blila ava, you take a bread dough, and instead of baking it, you cook it or you fry it. So, in that case, you never baked it. All you did was you cooked it or you fried it. Over there, we had the two opinions. We had the Deir Rishona, who said, if it's not baked, it's not bread. So it's a mezonus. The second, the Yesh Cholkim, said, no, if it started out as a blila ava, and it has Teresa Nanama at the end, it's hamotzi. Now we're talking about a little bit of a different case. Now we're talking about a blila ava that you cooked, but you didn't stop at cooking. You cooked it, and then you baked it. Oh, says the Mechaber, in that case, pas gomerhu. This is genuine pas gomer according to everybody. Why? Because you baked it. It's true that you cooked it originally, but then you baked it. So says the Mechaber pas gomerhu, this is genuine bread, umavarach alav hamotzi, and you make hamotzi. Take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says a nice cut and pay gimel. Sha'achar kach afoy betanor. After you scalded it and cooked it in boiling water, you baked it in an oven. Or maybe you didn't bake it in an oven. Maybe you put the dough into a pan without any liquid. That's also called baking, halachically, we said. So then, ice cut and pay dal, it says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, pas gomeru. This is genuine bread. What's the chiddush over here? Says the Mishnah Berurah. The loy tema. You should not say, keva decholte meikara, that since originally you cooked this bread, lav b'chlal lechemhu, it's no longer considered categorized as lechem. Don't say that. You might think, since I took the bagel and I cooked it before I baked it, maybe the first step that I did where I cooked it, maybe that makes it ois lechem. Maybe it's not lechem anymore, and it automatically is downgraded to a mezonus, despite the fact that I later stuck it in an oven. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, the Mechaber is telling you that's not the case. Since ultimately you baked it, it's pas. So the Mishnah Berurah says, the loy tevikim dechalta meikar labachal lechemu, kamash malon, that it's pas gomor, and umavarach alav hamotzi, and you make hamotzi. Now let's stop here for a second. Again, let's go back to the earlier halacha of Sif Yud Gimel, where you had a blila ava, and you did not bake it. All you did was cook it or fry it. So now let's analyze the halacha of the bagel in context of Sif Yud Gimel. So in Sif Yud Gimel, we had one daya, we had the Deir Rishona, who said if you take a blila ava and you cook it or fry it and you never bake it, right? So then the berachah becomes a mezonot, not hamotzi. Why? Because it wasn't baked. It wasn't baked. Lechem has to be baked. Okay. Now here in Sif Yud Daled, we're learning the halacha of cholot. What's the halacha of cholot? You took a blila ava and you cooked it. But then after you cooked it, you baked it. Says the Mechaber, it's hamotzi. Now, according to the Deir Rishona in Sif Yud Gimel, I see a very nice chiddush over here. There's a very nice chiddush. The chiddush is, since in Sif Yud Gimel we learned that when you cook a dough, it doesn't become hamotzi because something is only considered bread if it's baked. Maybe over here by a bagel, it's true you baked it at the end, but first you cooked it. Maybe the halacha is, once you take a dough and you cook it, that's not called lechem anymore. It's true you stuck it in an oven later, but who says that makes it now lechem? Maybe if you take raw dough and you cook it, so it's already called a cooked dough. Once it's a cooked dough, it's not lechem. Kamash malon, no. Since you went ahead and ultimately you baked it, it is lechem and it's hamotzi. So if you look at it that way, so the halacha of Sif Yud Gimel was, if you take dough and you only cook it and you never bake it, it's mezainos. Why? Because you never baked it and bread is baked. The halacha of Sif Yud Dalet is, if you took the cooked dough and then ultimately you baked it, you should know it is hamotzi. You might have thought once you cooked it, it's never hamotzi. Kamash Malan, no, since ultimately you baked it, it is hamotzi. That's according to the day of Rishon. But now let's look at the Yesh Cholkim. The Yesh Cholkim in Sif Yud Gimel said, if you take a blila ava and you never bake it, you only cook it, or you only fry it, it's hamotzi. Okay, so then is there a chiddush to Sif Yud Dalet? What's the chiddush at Sif Yud Dalet? In Sif Yud Dalet, you took a blila ava and you cooked it, and then you baked it. If the Yesh Cholkim, according to the Yesh Cholkim, even if you never baked it, it's hamotzi. Even if you only cooked it, it's hamotzi. So if you cooked it and then baked it, it's certainly hamotzi. Kol shkein kal v'chomer. So according to the Yesh Cholkim, there doesn't seem to be a chiddush over here in Sif Yud Dalet. Again, I know I'm being very repetitive, but again, in Sif Yud we had two opinions over here. So the first opinion said, if you take dough and you never bake it, you only cook it, it's a mezainos, because bread equals a baked product. You ask anybody, what's bread? It's a baked product. So the day of Rishona in Sif Yud Gimel says, if you don't bake it, it's not bread. That's the halach of Sif Yud Gimel. Comes along the halach of Sif Yud Dalet by Cholot, and it tells you a knech. You should know if you cooked it and then you baked it, it is hamotzi. I might have thought once you cook it, it's never hamotzi anymore. Kamash Balon, if you cook it and then bake it, it is hamotzi. But according to the Yesh Cholkim in Sif Yud Gimel, even if you never bake it, it's hamotzi. You take your bagel dough and you only cook it and you never bake it, it's hamotzi. So certainly if you bake it, it's hamotzi. So what's the chiddush? That brings us to the second pshat in Cholot. There's another pshat in Cholot, and the second pshat in Cholot is based on a Rashi in Menachos. Rashi in Menachos, the Gemara in Menachos, is talking about something called revucha. The Gemara says over here, Cholot mainiu. The Gemara in Menachos is talking about Cholot. And the Gemara asks, Cholot mainiu. What is Cholot? And with the Gemara, revucha. You want to know what Cholot is? Cholot is something called revucha. Says Rashi, what's revucha? Rashi says, revucha, mincha shemitzvasa berevucha. There is a type of mincha, the minchas chavitin, is made as a revucha, morbeches. What does that mean, says Rashi? B'mayim roischen. It's made in boiling water. And the way the revucha was made, the way the minchas chavitin was made was, you took flour, you mixed in a little oil into the flour, and then you took it and you threw it into boiling water. So there's another pshat in Cholot over here, that Cholot is not a bagel, Cholot is not a dough that you went ahead and boiled, Cholot is flour that you boiled. You took flour and you threw flour into boiling water. When you throw flour into boiling water, where the water has a rolling boil, what happens is the rolling boil of the water kneads the boiling water together with the flour and creates a dough. So what's cholot? These Mefarshim say, cholot is you took flour, you threw it into boiling water, the rolling boil created a dough out of the mixture of the flour and water, and then you went ahead and you baked it. If that's what cholot is, then there's a chiddush here, both according to the day Rishona and the Yesh Cholkim. Why? Because now the chiddush of cholot is that this is bichlal not the derech of lechem. This is not the derech of lechem. The derech of lechem is you take flour, you combine it with water, and you knead it, and you make a dough. That's not what you did here. Over here, you took flour and you just threw it into boiling water. The dough got created by itself, by the fact that it was scalded with the boiling water. Could be that that's not the derech of lechem. And maybe since it's not the derech of lechem, it's not a hamotzi. Kamash Malon Sif Yodalid, that chalut, since ultimately it is baked, is hamotzi and berachas hamazon. So that's another possible pshat. Now, I read Mishnah Berurah is cut and pei dalet, but I did not read Mishnah Berurah is cut and pei hey. The reason I didn't read pei hey is because Mishnah Berurah is cut and pei hey really gets involved in a new topic, and it's a topic that, again, we need some background on. The rest of Sif Yud Daled and the beginning of Sif Tesvav is going to discuss the halacha of a blila raka. So until this point, we've been talking about a blila ava. What's a blila ava? A blila ava is a heavy mixture. It's a heavy dough. It's a bread-like dough. It's a thick, heavy dough that when you turn it out of the mixing bowl, it's a clump. It's a ball. It's not liquid. It doesn't flow all over the countertop. It's a unified mass. It's a thick, heavy mass. A blila raka is a batter. A blila raka is kind of like a cake batter. But don't in your mind identify blila raka with cake. Because cake is pasaba b'kistin. Cake is sugar and oil and eggs and cocoa. That's pasaba b'kistin. So don't in your mind now equate blila raka equals cake. No. Blila raka equals a cake-like batter. It's a loose, liquidy batter. That's a blila raka. So now we're going to get involved in the sugya of a blila raka. Is it possible for a blila raka to be hamotzi? Is blila raka automatically a counter indication to hamotzi or not? Now the truth is that we already touched upon this question. Let's take a look. If you go back to Samach Zayin Amud Beis, and you go back to Sif Ches, in Sif Ches, the Mechaber introduced us to something called lachmaniyos. Now, lachmaniyos, I don't know if you want to translate it as breads, biscuits. I'm not sure how to translate the word lachmaniyos. But the Mechaber introduced us to lachmaniyos. And the Mechaber told us that there are two different types of lachmaniyos. There are lachmaniyos that are blila ava, and there are lachmaniyos that are blila raka. And what did the Mechaber tell us? The Mechaber told us lachmaniyos that are blila ava, those are lechem gomer. Lachmaniyos that are blila ava, that have a heavy, thick, bread-like dough, those are hamotzi and berachas hamazon. And when we learned Sif Ches, the way I translated lachmaniyos that are blila ava, I told you it's like a lafa. It's like a lafa. It's like a flatbread, but a soft flatbread, not a crunchy flatbread. A soft flatbread. Note that I didn't say wraps. This is like thicker than a wrap. More like a lafa. It has Teresa Danama. It's got bubbles. It's soft. And it's used as bread. That's lachmaniyos that are a blila ava. And the Mechaber said that lachmaniyos that are blila ava, he said it's lechem gomor and it's hamotzi and berachas hamazon. Then the Mechaber told us about lachmaniyos that are a blila raka. And what the Mechaber told us was, oisan sheblilasan raka. The lachmaniyos that have a blila raka, they have a liquid-like batter, vidakim me'oid, and the final product is very thin, shekoirin nivlash. This is something called nivlash. On those, the Mechaber said they're borim min mezainos and a berachah achas bein shalosh, unless you kaveh sud on them. If you kaveh sud on them, they become hamotzi and berachas hamazon. So this really was the first introduction that we had to blila raka, was the lachmaniyos that are blila raka. Now, you'll tell me, okay, so the first place that we met blila raka in Sif Ches, we found out that blila raka is mezainos. Not quite. Because, yes, the lachmaniyos that are a blila raka that the Mechaber is talking about in Sif Ches are a mezainos and a bracha achas bein shalosh. Why, says the Mishnah Berurah? Because they are rakim ma'oid. The reason those are mezainos, says the Mishnah Berurah, and this is the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut lamed zayin back there, is because he says they're very thin and they're very soft. And they're not meant to be used as lechem. You're not kivei sud on them. They're like pasa babakistan. That's why those bli l'rakas are mezainos and bracha achas bein shalosh. But if you are kivei sud on them, then the Mechaber said they get elevated to HaMוציא and berachas hamazon. Now, the Mishnah Berurah over there, also in Ois Kat and Lamed Zayin, told us, beware. This is only true if the lachmaniyos that are a bli l'raka are taka very, very thin and very, very soft. But, said the Mishnah Berurah, if they're not dakim verakim biyoser, if they're not very, very thin and very, very soft, in the words of the Mishnah Berurah back there, avalim einam rakim v'dakim kolkach, if they're not so soft and thin, mivur b'sif yodalid, then it is going to be explained later on in sif yodalid, the din lechem alav, that this bli l'raka is called bread, or mevarach hamotzi, and you make hamotzi. So all the way back in sif ches, we have already been introduced to the concept that just because something is a bli l'raka, just because something is a liquid batter, that does not automatically mean that the bracha is mezainos. You could have a liquid batter, and it could still be hamotzi. What does it depend on? It depends on the final product. If the final product has some substance to it, if it's not so thin and so soft, if it has some substance to it, aka it has tayar lechem, then it could be hamotzi. It's only when it's very, very thin and very, very soft and insubstantial, that's when it doesn't have tayar lechem, and that's when it becomes like pasa babakistan, and it depends whether or not you kaveh on it. So that's what came out of Sivches. Now, let's take a look here at the Ramah, and I know that I didn't do Ois Kat Pei Hey yet in the Mishnah Berurah, even though Ois Kat Pei Hey is on the Mechaber that we did already. The reason I didn't do it yet is because Ois Kat Pei Hey touches upon bli l'raka. And I think we need to see the Ramah that discusses bli l'raka before we can see that Mishnah Berurah. So says the Ramah, Hagah. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down on Ayin Amud Aleph. Hagah. V'chein, similarly, davar shebli l'osay raka. If you have something that has a liquid batter, sha'afoy b'tanur b'loy mashke, but you baked it. So you have a bli l'raka, and it's a bread bli l'raka. It's not a cake bli l'raka. We're talking about a bli l'raka of flour and water. Maybe a little mayperis or a little salt or a little, but not enough to demote it to pasa babakistan. We're talking about a bread bli l'raka, not a cake bli l'raka. So says the Ramah, if you have a preparation which is a bli l'raka, sha'afoy b'tanur b'loy mashke, and you bake it in an oven, and it's baked, it's b'loy mashke, it's without a liquid. Dinoy kapas. The halacha is that it's bread, despite the fact that it's a bli l'raka. Umevarach alav hamotzi v'shalosh brachos. And the bracha rishona is going to be hamotzi, and the bracha achrona is going to be berachas hamazon. V'chein, and similarly, if you didn't put it in an oven, im afoy be'ilfis b'loy mashka. If you poured it into a pan, but you poured it into a hot pan without any oil, or with just a drop of oil so it shouldn't catch, but you're baking it in a pan, again, the bracha is going to be hamotzi and berachas hamazon. And now let's skip all of these parentheses over here and continues the Ramah. Umba'at mashke, and if you put a little bit of oil on the pan, shemoishkin b'ya ilfis, just to grease the pan, shelo yisarei fe'isa, so that the dough shouldn't catch, loy mikvi mashke, that's not called a mashke, and that's called baking. So says the Ramah very, very clearly over here, If you have a bread bli l'raka and you bake it, it's hamotzi. It's not mezainis, even though it's a bli l'raka. Now let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Pehei. Now Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Pehei is going back on the Mechaber, where the Mechaber said that on Cholot, right? Cholot was the scalded dough, the bagel, or the scalded flour. Over there, the Mechaber said that the bracha is hamotzi, u'mevarach alav hamotzi. Says the Mishnah Berurah, va'afilu haisa bli lasei raka. Even if we have something which is a bli l'raka. Now we know, because we already learned the Ramah, we know that the Ramah is about to say that a bli l'raka could be hamotzi. If you take a bread bli l'raka and you bake it in an oven, or you bake it in a pan without oil, it's hamotzi. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, a chiddush from the Magen Avram. Va'afilu haisa bli lasei raka shekalata beroischin va'achakach afa b'tanam avarach hamotzi. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah is going to tell you that a 100% baked bli l'raka is hamotzi. Now I'm telling you from the Magen Avram, the same way when you make a bagel. You take a bli l'ava and you cook it and then you bake it, it's still hamotzi. So too by a bli l'raka. If you cook a bli l'raka or you fry a bli l'raka, and then you bake it, it also retains its status of hamotzi. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here. Oid hevi Magen Avram. The Magen Avram also says, Ta'afilu tignoi b'shemen va'afoi akakach mevarach hamotzi. Again, this is going back on the halacha of cholot. The Mechaber only discusses by cholot a dough that you cooked and then baked. How about a dough that you fried and then baked? Is that the same halacha? A bagel, you took the dough and you cooked it in water, and then you baked it. The Mechaber says it's afui, it's baked, it's hamotzi. How about if you fry the dough and then you bake it? Is it also hamotzi? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oid hevi Magen Avram tafilu tignoi b'shemen. Even if you fried it in oil, va'afay achakach, and then you baked it, mevarach hamotzi. Umuchach sham midvarav, and it's clear from the words of the Magen Avram over there, this spherulate that the Magen Avram holds, ta'afilu b'deloi kava alayu mevarach hamotzi. That this hamotzi is even if you're not kavei suda on this dish, this dough that was fried and then baked. Why? Because it's not possible b'kistin, it's mamish lechem. Achein hataz v'oid harbe achroinim iskinu, but the Taz and other achroinim agree. The tigun b'dvash oy b'shemen. If you take this dough and you fry it in a lot of oil or in shemen or in oil, or kahai gavde, mashva yisrael pasa babikistin, that turns the dough into pasa babikistin, kemayim nilush be'elu aminim, the same way it would be if you actually kneaded the dough with oil or with honey. And therefore, but the loy kavasuda mavarch barinim is being mizarnis falamichya. Achein dabat, you should know the ene nikra pasa babikistin elo b'shetigda b'chol kach shemen at sheyushem ha'ikra ba'atam l'gabi ha'kamach. Remember, it doesn't get downgraded to pasa babikistin unless by virtue of the frying in oil or in honey, it really got the taste of the oil and the honey, which and that means that the taste of the flavorings exceeds the flavor of the flour itself. U'gemay the kasav Ramah bechlala the paskistin b'siv zayin ayin sham b'mishnah berurah. Okay, Ois cotton pevav, and then we'll recap. U'mevarach alav hamotzi. The Ramah said if you take a bli l'raka and you bake a bli l'raka, it has the halacha of pas, and you make hamotzi. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Ois cotton pevav, I feel a bit like kavalayu. Even if you're not kavei suda, it's still a mitzi. Why? Because it's not possible b'kistin, it's real bread. You take a bli l'raka, that's a bread bli l'raka. It's not a cake batter. It's not full of flavorings. It's not full of eggs and oil and sugar and cocoa. No, it's flour and water and maybe a little salt, maybe a little baking soda, and maybe yeast. But it's a bli l'raka, it's a liquid batter, but it's a pas liquid batter. And now you bake it in an oven, it's not pas b'kistin, it's real bona fide pas. So it's hamotzi even if you're not kivei suda. This is only true if it's not very, very thin and soft. If it's very thin and very soft, it becomes possible kistin. And take a look at what we wrote in Sifches, and I prefaced Sifches to you before we did this. Now let's just finish off the Ramah here. Says the Ramah 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines off the bottom, middle of the line. But if you have even a bread, bli l'raka, v'tignoi b'mashke, and now you fry it, l'kuli amalav lechemu, everybody would agree that that's not lechem. Why? Because now we're talking about something. You see, till now, the Ramah was talking about a bli l'raka, a bread bli l'raka that you baked. Over there, says the Ramah, I don't care if it was a bli l'raka. So what? So it was a bli l'raka. But it's not possible b'kistin. It's not packed full of flavorings. It's not super thin and super soft. The end product has tayar lechem. It's bread-like, so it's hamotzi. But if you take a bli l'raka and you never bake it, all you do is fry it or cook it, that's certainly going to be a mezainis. Why? Because how did it ever get shem lechem? It wasn't, you see, in Sif Yud Gimel, where you took a blila ava and you fried it or cooked it. So over there's a yesh cholkim that says that it's hamotzi. Why? Because it was a blila ava, and at the end it has tayar lechem. At the end it's a bread-like product. So, okay, that could be hamotzi. But over here, if you have a blila raka, and then you never bake it, then, like the Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's cut Bezayin. You never bake it in an oven. All you do is fry it in a pan with oil. Then, according to everybody, even according to the second opinion, the Yesh Cholkim and Sif Yud Gimel, who holds that a blila ava that you fry could be a moitzi, over here by a blila raka, lav lechemu. This is not lechem. Because it was never prepared in a bread-like manner. Again, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a bread-like bli l'raka that you never bake, you only fry. Well, in Sif Yud Gimel, we spoke about a bli l'ava that you never bake and you only fry. So in Sif Yud Gimel, we said the dairy shina holds you didn't bake it, it's not bread. The Yesh Cholkim hold it. It started out as a bli l'ava, so the original dough was a bread dough. Now you fried it, you didn't bake it. Okay, but the end product is tayar lechem, it's hamotzi. But over here, if you're talking about a bli l'raka that you never baked, it's a bli l'raka that you only fried. So it wasn't a bread-like dough, because it wasn't a bli l'ava, it was a bli l'raka, and you didn't prepare it the way you prepare bread. You didn't break it, you fried it. So then the Mishnah Berurah says it never became an isa, it never became a bread dough. It never was bread. So it's something that's not bread that is tayar lechem, but it's not bread. So it can't be a moitzi, it has to be a mezainos. Wow. So this was a real bona fide mouthful. I'm not going to go into Sif Tesvav now and go into Troiknin. I was going to, but we're already at 44 minutes over here. I'm not going to go into Troiknin now. We'll have to save that for tomorrow. But I think a short little recap is in order. The chalut, the simple translation of the chalut is it's a bagel. It's a dough that you took when it was raw, and first you cooked it and then you baked it. The Mechaber says that is lechem gomor, that is hamotzi. What's the chiddush? So we said, according to the Dairy Shaina in Sif Yud Gimel, we understand very simple what the chiddush is. The chiddush is the Dairy Shaina holds that when you cook dough instead of baking it, it's not hamotzi. Why? Because bread is baked and this wasn't baked. Kamash Malon Sif Yud Dalid, that a bagel, even though the beginning of its preparation is by cooking it, since Lamaisa, at the end you baked it, it is hamotzi. We were struggling to figure out what the chiddush is according to the Yesh Cholkim. According to the Yesh Cholkim, dough that you cook is hamotzi even if you never bake it. Certainly if you bake it, it's hamotzi. So he said maybe it's the second type of chalut, which is that you never kneaded it into a dough. You scalded flour. You threw flour into boiling water. You never kneaded it, and then you baked it. So that's mamish not the way of making bread. Kamash Balan, since it is a dough and you did bake it, it is hamotzi. That was the halacha of chalut. Then we got into bli l'raka. What we're seeing by bli l'raka is bli l'raka does not automatically exclude hamotzi. Don't think that just because something started off as a liquid batter, it can't be hamotzi. The Ramah tells you straight out, if you have a bread bli l'raka, it's not a pasa babakisted bli l'raka. It's not full of flavorings. It's a bread bli l'raka. If you have a bread bli l'raka, and then you go ahead and you bake it, and the final product has tayar lechem, it's got some substance to it, and it has tayar lechem, then it's hamotzi. If it's very, very thin and very, very insubstantial, then we saw already in Sifches, that's lachmaniyos, that are insubstantial, that's like pasa babakisted, that's going to be mezainos and berachah achas bein shalosh. But if it has some thickness and some substance to it, even though it's a bli l'raka, it's going to be hamotzi. We saw from the Mishnah Berurah, even if you take a bli l'raka and you cook or fry the bli l'raka first, and then you bake the bli l'raka, and the end result has tayar lechem, it'll also be hamotzi. If you take a bli l'raka and you never bake it, so it's a bli l'raka and it's only cooked or fried, then it never became like a lechem, and then it's going to be mezainos, and it's going to be a berachah achas bein shalish. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's and first parnasset should do them to all the need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yas Tzedek and Herav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.